Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah shiur. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Aleph, and we will be learning today Mitzvah Hashem Daf Lamed Ches Amid Aleph, as well as a good part of Lamed Ches Amid Beis, I hope. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Tefillin, and we begin today on the very bottom line of the Shulchan Aruch Lamed Zayin Amid Beis, Siman Chav Zayin Sif Tes. Says the Mechaber, Mekayim Hanachas Tefillin Shal Rosh, the proper placement for the Tefillin Shal Rosh. Me'aschalas ikre hasear mimitzchai. It begins at the place where the roots of the hair begin at the top of the forehead. Ad soif hamakayim shamoichai shel tinok roifes, and the tefillin could be put on the head up until the soft spot on the head of a young baby, known in English as the fontanelle. When a baby is first born, the bones of the skull are not fully knitted together yet, and therefore there is a soft spot where the bones meet. There's actually more than one. It's called a fontanelle, and it begins up along the slope of the head before you reach the top of the head, near the end of the slope. That's where the fontanelle would normally be located. So we have two landmarks over here on the head for the proper placement of the Shal Rosh. Unfortunately, I really can't show you either one. I can't show you the hairline because I'm long past having that hairline. But when we speak about the hairline, what we mean is, and I guess I could just show you the hairs over here on the side of the head, we mean where the roots of the hair begin. So the lower roots, where you start having the hairline, where the roots come out, the tefillin have to be above that, and they have to be between. That's the low point. The tefillin cannot come down lower than that, and the high point is the fontanelle, the soft spot on top of the head, and we'll discuss this in a little bit of greater detail. Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah here on Lamed Ches Amid Aleph, Ois Katan Lamed Gimel, Ikre Hasear. We go by the roots of the hair. Perish de beinei necha lav mamishu. What the Mechaber is telling us over here is, you need to understand that when the Torah HaTorah says, Ukeshartem la'oisal yadecha v'hayu l'toitafais bein einecha, the tefillin are supposed to be toitafais, between your eyes, lav mamishu. It doesn't literally mean between your eyes. The Garmin Gzeres Shava Miloisa Simu Karcha Bein Einechem. We learn Gzeres Shava from the Isser Lav of Loisa Simu Karcha. We have a Lav Da'araisa that you're not allowed to rip out hair in mourning over a mace. That's Loisa Simu Karcha. And over there the pasuk says Bein Einechem. You cannot rip out a bald spot between your eyes. Now, it's impossible to create a bald spot between your eyes because between your eyes is not a place where hair grows. So obviously, when the Torah HaTorah says Loisa Simu Karcha Bein Einechem, it does not mean literally between your eyes. It means on the head. And we learn out Gzeres Shava, just like Bein Einechem by Loisa Simu Karcha means on top of the head, so too kishartem loisal yodecha vayulu taitafais bein einecha by tefillin also means on the head. It doesn't mean literally between the eyes. So what's the point of bein einechem? That the bias has to be aligned with between your eyes. It has to be on the middle of the head. But let's see how the Mishnah Berurah writes this. Again, Ois Katan Lamed Gimel, Pirush. The bein einecha lav mamishu. When the Torah HaTorah says v'hayu l'toitafais bein einecha, it is not to be taken literally. The Garminon Gzeres Shava miloisa simu karcha bein einechem, because the Gemara learns out Gzeres Shava from the Isser of loisa simu karcha ha'amor etzel mace, which is a lav that is written b'negea to a mace. Person's not allowed to rip out his hair in mourning. Just like over there by the lava of Loisa Simu Karcha, we're speaking about a place where hair grows, where it's possible to make a bald spot, Vahu Baraish, and that means on top of the head. Afkan, so to here, Maschil Mekayim Tfilin, the proper place for the Tfilin Sharosh begins, Mimakayim Sheyesh Shaychus Karcha, from the point at which you are able to make a karcha. So when you reach the point of the head where hair begins to grow, that's the beginning of the area for the tefillin. Where the hair begins to grow, that's where you can make a bald spot. So where does the proper place for tefillin begin? At the hairline. Dahainu mimakaim haschalas tzmichais hasa'aros shebarosh. This means the place where the hair begins to grow on the head, the hairline. Now, the Mishnah Berurah tells us, "V'rabim nichshalim be'isser zeh." Unfortunately, there are many who stumble over this isser. V'tayim loymar, and they make a mistake and they say, "Sha'akotza ha'elyoin maschil mimakim haseor." What they think is that what this means is the top edge of the shel rosh has to be over the hairline. The ikar tefillin munach al hametzach, while the bulk of the bias of the tefillin can lay on the forehead. And says the Chavetz Chaim, va'oivrim al issa daraisa. By putting on tefillin in this way, they're actually being over on an issa daraisa. Why? The chol tefillin tzrichid liyos munachim b'makam sheyesh karcha, because the truth is that the entire bias of the tefillin has to be located in a place where the isser of loisa sibu karcha could apply. The hainu, which is sheyia afilu kitzei tachtoin shalat titura, even the bottom edge of the titura munach must be placed al mekayim haschalas ikrei haseir, above the area where the hair begins to grow. So let me show you over here. I'm going to put on my shel rosh loosely so that I don't have a shaila really of a bracha, not be having kavanah to be yod to the mitzvah. What he's saying is like this. He's saying a lot of people make a mistake. Let's imagine that my hairline, my non-existent hairline, now you'll be asking me the question, by the way, so what do you do, people like me who don't have a hairline? What's the proper place to makam malachas tefillin? We'll get to that in a moment. But let's imagine, if you will, that was my hairline, right over there, okay? So then, the tefillin are located above the hairline. Says the Chavetz Chaim, many people make a mistake, and what they do is like this. They put their tefillin way down over here, and the mistake that they're making is they're thinking that as long as the upper edge of the bias is above the hairline, they think that that's okay. They don't realize that even the bottom edge over here, this has to be above the hairline. So you can't have the tefillin like this, where just the upper edge is above the hairline. You have to have it like this, where the entire bias is above the hairline. This mirror image of the camera gets me all the time. Okay. So that's the way it would have to be. Then the Mishnah Berurah says, Aval ashkiach lemi sheyesh lo sa'aros aruchos. And he says, we don't go by people who have long hair, where the hair lays sheshoichvim ad chatzi ametzach, and the hair lies down halfway down the forehead, la'niach sham tefillin, and then say that it's okay to wear tefillin over there. What he's saying is, another mistake people make. Let's say somebody has long bangs, and his bangs come down to here. So he'll say, I could put my tefillin all the way down. I could put my tefillin all the way down there, because my bangs end over here. So my tefillin is above the hair. Says the Chavetz Chaim, no, that's not what it means. It's not what it means. Because the beginning place for the place of the tefillin, we go by the beginning of the roots, not where the end of the hair is. We go with the beginning where the roots are. That's the hairline, and the entire tefillin has to be above that hairline. And says the Mishnah Berurah, you're better off having the tefillin higher up on the head, so even a little bit above the hairline. Because in reality, says the Chavetz Chaim, you should have enough room from the beginning place of the tefillin, from the hairline until the fontanelle, until the soft spot, there should be room over there for 2 bottom. So says the Chavetz Chaim, listen, if you go a little higher, you're not going to go wrong. So if you're not 100% sure, is it above the hairline, is it not above the hairline? Says the Chavetz Chaim, go a little higher. Err on the high side. The Yoser Tov lo yechsas lamayla misher zeh, da hamakom yesh barosh lo nyash shtei tefillin. Kedei shelo yishamet lamata ala metzach. Better err on the high side than risk having the tefillin come down onto the forehead. V'chala manichan al hametzach. Anybody who puts the tefillin on the forehead, hu minig karoim. That's the minig of the tzedukim, who learned the pasuk b'pshutai k'mashmai. Beinei necha. They learned that mamish the tefillin have to be down over here, beinei necha, because they weren't mekabel Torah Shabbat Peh. So they just followed their basic translation of the pasuk, and they said, "Oh, it's got to be beinei necha. It's got to be down on the forehead, beinei necha." Okay. V'loy osa mitzvah, and if you wear the tefillin down there, you're not yoitza the mitzvah. V'chol bal nefesh yazer l'chaverov. A bal nefesh should warn his friends, the alamdem, and teach them shelo yikashlu bazeh, that they should not be nichshal and make these mistakes. Kedei shelo yiu chas v'shalom b'chal poishe Yisrael begufan. You can have a person who's wearing tefillin his whole life, and he's always wearing the tefillin on the wrong place. If he's wearing the tefillin so that even the edge of the tefillin come down too low, he's not yoitza. So then he never put on tefillin. And then he's what the Gemara calls Paishe Yisrael begufan. Paishe Yisrael, somebody who's over Averis begufan, with their body. Okay. Tezeu karkafta de loimunach tefillin, a skull that never put on tefillin. V'gama bracha hevi levatala. And also all the brachas that they made would be brachas levatalas, because they're not really putting on a shalrosh. The tefillin shemunachin shaloi b'mekaiman hevi kimunachin b'kisan, because if you're wearing a shalrosh and it's not in the proper place on the head, it's as if it's in the bag. You're not really wearing it. V'im nishbetu mimekaiman sarch lachzir tekif. And if the shalrosh moves out of its proper place, you have to move it back immediately. Or the Indian bracha, and as far as whether or not you have to make a new bracha when you return the shalrosh to its proper place, ayin la'el b'siman chavhei sif beis. A racket going on outside. I didn't know if it was coming from something over here or from outside. Okay. If the tefillin move out of their place, you have to immediately move them back into their proper place, or linyan bracha. But as to the question of whether or not you have to make a bracha, ayin le'el b'siman chafei sif yud beis. Chavetz Chaim tells us to look back in Siman chafei sif yud beis. Over there we had a whole discussion. We had the shita of the lavush, who holds that during davening, you always have the din of somebody who has das to be wearing the tefillin at the entire time. So therefore, even if your tefillin move out of their place during davening, it's like somebody who took off his tefillin al das to put them right back on. And we paskin like the Ramah, if you took off the shalrosh and you had das to put it right back on, you don't make another bracha. So the Lavush says, during davening, if your tefillin move out of the place, you could move it back without making another bracha. Okay. All right. Sorry, just the air conditioning is giving me a little bit of a problem here. All right, very good. So now, I mentioned the question, let's say somebody like me now, I can't tell if my tefillin is above my hairline or not, because my hairline is ancient history. So if you take a look at Dirshu footnote number 35, he starts the footnote here with a little bit of an odd case. He says, Umisha loy gadlu loy saros beroisho l'tzad panav. Let's say somebody was born with a condition that he doesn't grow hair on the front of his head. Kasav ha'ois chayim v'shalom, she'aniach es ha'tfilin b'makim she'derech hasaris l'tzmayach etzel shar hanoshim. Such a person would go by what's normal. So I guess you would take the average hairline of an adult male, and that's where he would have to put his tefillin. He would have to put his tefillin over that area because he doesn't have a natural hairline. In the second paragraph, he gives the more common case. Or somebody like me who was going bald. So the hair fell out, and I could no longer tell where my hairline is. You go by what was your hairline. So obviously, years ago, I set up my tefillin based on my hairline. And the truth is that I still do have a fairly good recollection of where that hairline was. And that's the way I keep my tefillin. And I try to err on the high side. Because again, there seems to be quite a bit of room from the hairline up until the fontanelle. Now, as far as exactly where that point is, again, an adult doesn't have a fontanelle, right? The bones are already knit together. You can't feel a soft spot. You don't have a soft spot. But they say it's near the top of the slope. The head slopes until it reaches the peak at the top of the head. It's before the peak. It's somewhat before the peak of the slope. Personally, I wear small tefillin also, so that gives you a little bit more leeway. If your tefillin are very small, you don't have to worry so much. Okay. The mabarta of the shalroish, right? That's going to be the top. So you have to make sure that the mabarta, the top edge, doesn't go higher than the makayim sheroisha shaltinaik reifes. Okay. All right, now we go to Sif Yud. Tzarech sheyeh hakesher me'achorei haroish lamayla ba'orif. The kesher of the tefillah shalroish. When you put on your shalroish, the bias is going on the front of your head, and the kesher, the knot, is going to be in the back of the head. Now, there's also a question of proper placement of the kesher. So the Mechaber says, where should the kesher be? Tzarech sheyeh hakesher me'achorei haroish. It has to be on the back of the head. Now note, the lashon of the Mechaber is achorei haroish, the back of the head, not the neck. Lamayla, up, ba'orif, like lamayla ba'orif, above the neck. Okay, let's see what the Mishnah Berurah says here. Ois kat lamed hey ba'orif, shahu soif hagulgoilus. When we use the word orif here, we mean the end of the skull. V'hu neged haponim. That turns out to be opposite the face. V'loi kol kach lamato kineged agoroid. We're not talking about a spot so low down on the neck that it is opposite the throat. So if I turn sideways like this, what we want that the kesher should be up high so that it's opposite the face, not down low where it's opposite the neck. And the Chavetz Chaim gives us a siman for this, and he brings this down from the Shari Tshuva. V'toiv sheyeh munach ikar hakesher lamayla min haguma. If you feel along the back of your head, there's a bump and there's an indentation. So right beneath where the skull ends, there's the nape of the neck. There's an indentation over there. The Chavetz Chaim says that the ikar of the kesher, the bulk of the kesher, should be laying on the bump, not beneath the bump, but right on the bump. Val kalpanim, and at least, says the Chavetz Chaim, leish lizar, we should take care, shalo yeh afilu miktas hakesher munach b'makom panui miseya. Certainly we should make sure that not even a little bit of the kesher of the shalroish should be located on the neck beneath the hairline on the back of the neck. Teshamhu mafrekes hatzavar, because that is called the mafrekes hatzavar v'loi oirif. That is not called the oirif, and the Mechaber tells us that the kesher has to be on the oirif. V'lachein, and therefore yesh lizar, we should take care. Shetia haritzua hamakeves harosh mitzum tzemes. The ritzuas, the part of the ritzuas of the shalrosh that go around the neck, says the Chavetz Chaim, they should be tight. They should be mitzum tzamos. They should be tightened. They should be mitzumtzum. They should be tight. Umuhudekes, and firmly emplaced. Saviv roishai, around the head. V'lo hekef haritzua gadol mehekef harosh. The ritzua should not be too loose. They shouldn't be bigger than what you need to go around the head. Da'az ikatarti l'reyusa. Because if they are that big, you're going to have two problems. Chada, one problem is titzrichim hiduk mamish. In order to be mekayim the mitzvah of ukishartam, to tie on the tefillin, we need kishira. Kishira means that they're firmly emplaced. So we need it to be tight so that it should be firmly emplaced. And the b'inenu kishartam la'ois, v'hahiduki akshira, and the tightening of the ritzuas around the head, that's the kishira. Shenis, and the second problem is, dimem refuyim, if they're loose, saviv hekef roshai, going around the head, yipar laketzitza lafanav al mitzchay. If it's loose, then the bias is going to fall down onto the forehead. Or it's going to either you're going to have a problem on the front of the head or on the back of the head. Either because it's loose, the bias is going to slip forward, or you'll maintain the proper position of the bias on top, but still, because the circumference of the ritzuas is too large, the kesher will go down too low. Or the kesher is going to go down on your neck, and then the kesher won't be in the right place. So what have we seen here so far? What we've seen here so far is, as far as the proper placement of the shalrosh, we're getting over here three landmarks. The bias on the front, the bias has to be, the entire bias has to be above the hairline and beneath the soft spot on top of the head. And the Mishnah Berurah told us better err on the high side than on the low side, because you should have extra room going upwards, but going downwards, if even a little bit is under the hairline, you're not yaitza. Then on the back of the head, we have the proper placement of the kesher. The kesher is supposed to be high enough. It has to be on an area with his hair. It has to be keneged the panim. It has to be opposite the face, not opposite the throat. It can't be all the way down here, the kesher. And the Mishnah Berurah told us that the kesher, the ikar of the kesher, should be on the bump on the back of the neck. Okay. Now, let's go weiter in the mechaber. So we go back to limud ches amud aleph, last three words on the page. Says the mechaber, tzarich lechavein haketzitza, we have to make sure that the ketzitza, this is the ketzitza, the foundation of the bias, that the ketzitza, shetehei be'emtza, it should be located in the middle. Shetehei be'emtza, in the middle of the forehead. Kedei shetehei keneged bein ha'inayim. So it's opposite bein ha'inayim, between the eyes. That's what it means. V'hayulu taitafais bein einecha. V'gam hakesher yeh be'emtza ha'oiref, and so too the knot in the back. It should be on the middle of the upper neck. V'layita lekan lekan, it should not be more to one side or the other. V'tzar sheyehei hamakom shebekesher shenireh ke'in dalid litzad chutz. Another important factor. The kesher of the shalrosh is formed like a dalid. Now, what we want is that dalid should be recognizable as a dalid litzad chutz. So in other words, when the tefillin are on you and somebody looks at you, looks at your back, they should be able to see a dalid. The roof of the back of the dalid should be on the right, and the gag, the roof of the dalid, should be extending to the left. Not the opposite. Not that you put the kesher the other way so that when somebody looks at the back of your neck, they see a backwards dalid. No, the dalid should be outwards. So when somebody looks at you from the back of the neck, they see a properly formed dalid. That's what it means over here. V'tzarashi ha'amakom shebekesher shenireh ke'ein dalid. The part of the kesher that looks like a dalid has to be litzad chutz. It has to be facing outward. Haggah, says the Ramah, V'hu adin b'kesher shel yad. So too, when it comes to the yud, the kesher of the shel yad, tzarich lizar shelo yishapech. Also, it has to be in that position, not flipped over. Okay, says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Lamed Vav. The Mechaber told us that we have to take care that the ketzitza, the bias, should be be'emtza. It should be on the middle of the head, opposite between the eyes. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Lamed Vav, Shetei be'emtza roichav haroish. Has to be in the middle of the width of the head. It should not be tilted to one side. Many Achrayim write that if you're not careful about this and you don't actually have the tefillin in the middle, you're not yoitza. We have to be very careful with this. Gam nachay lizayr. It's also proper to take care lechatchila shelo yihu tefillin gedoylin beyoser. Lechatchila, you should take care that the tefillin should not be overly large. Da'az, because if they are overly large, efsher kemat shiyu mehudakin ala rosh. Problem number one: if they're very big, it's hard to set them firmly in place on the head. If they're very big, they don't get tight to the head. They just sit on the surface. Vegam shiyu menachet al makayman. Also, it's much easier to make sure that the bias of the shalrosh is in the proper place between the hairline and the soft spot if they're small. If they're very big, you could run into trouble. Because if they would be very big, and you would make sure to put the entire bias over the hairline, they're not going to be tight. And then the kesher also won't be in the right place. We said that the kesher, the dalid, has to be facing outward. On the back of the head, we have two ritzuas extending out of the bottom of the kesher. So kind of we have two ritzuas going into the top of the dalid, and we have two ritzuas coming out of the bottom of the dalid. The one that extends to the left of the one who's wearing the tefillin, nimshekas l'rochbai k'maygag l'dalid. Very interesting. See, here's my dalid. Here's the gag of the dalid. You've got one ritzua that goes in the direction of the gag. You've got another ritzua that goes down in the direction of the back of the kesher. Says the Chavetz Chaim, those two ritzuas alone, this one, this is the gag, and this one, this is the back, they also form a dalid. So says the Mishnah Berurah that when the Mechaber says that the part of the tefillin that looks like a dalid, the part of the kesher that looks like a dalid should be facing outward, he's referring to those ritzuas. Again, kishtei ritzuas yotzais b'tach kesher lamata. There are two ritzuas that extend out of the bottom of the kesher of the sharosh. Oisa yotzais b'tzat smayla miniach, the one that comes out to the left of the one who's wearing the tefillin, nimshachas l'rochbay kamay gagadalis. It goes in the width, it goes horizontally in the same direction as the gag. A dalid has the back to the right and the gag extends to the left. So too, you have this ritzua over here. We're not talking about the top ones. You have two that come in on the top. Forget those. We have two that come out at the bottom. One of them goes to the left in the same direction as the gag. And the other one, says the Mishnah Berurah, the rightmost one, nimshekes ba'orich, it goes vertically, lamata, down, kamay regel adalis, like the back or the leg of the dalid. The yira, and you have to be careful, shalo yishapech hakesher ba'asiyasai ubilavishasai. You have to be careful that the dalid is made in the proper direction, and that while you're wearing it, it doesn't get inverted. Okay. Now we go to Sif Yod Aleph, 3 lines down in the Shulchan Aruch. Says the Mechaber, Tzarech sheyeh shachar sheberitzuos litzad chutz. Halacha l'moshe b'Sinai that the tefillin and the ritzuos have to be black. The black side of the ritzuos have to be facing outward. Nowadays, there are many people, me myself, the tefillin that I'm using over here on my spare pair, my regular pair of tefillin, I have ritzuos that are black on both sides. However, one side is blackened with like a polished black. It's nice and shiny. The other side is just absorbed into the leather. It's a different type of paint. So the blackened side should be facing outward. And they should not become inverted. And this is bein shel yad, bein shel rosh. This refers to this applies to both the ritzuos of the shel yad and the ritzuos of the shel rosh. Yeah, but what part of the ritzuos does it specifically apply to? Let's see the Mishnah Berurah here. Says the Mishnah Berurah, we should make sure that the ritzuos do not become inverted. And if they do become inverted, midas chasidusu, it would be a midas chasidus, lehis anois, to fast, a liftais pitstaka, or to redeem that fast by giving money to tztaka. But ve'en lahakbid shelo yisapchu, we only have to be makbid that the ritzuos should not become inverted. Ela mashamakif es harosh, only the part of the ritzuos of the shel rosh that go around the head, ve'es hakiboris, and the part of the ritzuos of the shel yad that go around the bicep pamachas one time. Ava mashakorech achakach, but the windings that you make on the shel yad, v'chein masha mishtalshel lefanav me'aritzua, and likewise the ritzuos of the shel rosh that hang down in front of you, ein tzarich lahakbid klal shelo yisapech. You don't have to be makbid that those shouldn't become inverted. Levisheina me'ikar mitzvah, because that's not me'ikar mitzvah. It's not really necessary me'ikar adin. U'mikamakay mishum noya mitzvah, but still in all, for the beauty of the mitzvah, roy lahapich, we should make sure to flip them in the proper direction. Sheyeh hashachar l'tzad chutz, so the black should be facing outward. Afilu b'hamoisar, even in the extra parts of the ritzuos. So what did we say here so far? The Mechaber told us, when it comes to the ritzuos, we have to be very careful that the ritzuos should not become inverted. And said the Mechaber, not only do we have to be careful that it shouldn't happen, but if it does happen, he brought down a midas chasidus that somebody should either fast or he should give money to tzedakah to be paida, to redeem that fast. Says the Mishnah Berurah, what part of the ritzuos are we talking about? We're talking about on the shel rosh. We're talking about this, the part of the ritzuah that goes around the head. We don't want this to happen. We don't want it to become inverted. And that's the part that if you put on your tefillin, you made a bracha, you put on your tefillin, and then you realize, oh goodness, it was inverted the whole time, that's when there's a midas chasidus, either to fast or to give tzedakah. But this over here, the Mishnah Berurah says you don't have to be makbid. He says, mishum noi mitzvah, for the beauty of the mitzvah, we should make sure to wear it the right way and have the beautiful black side out, not to have it like this. But you don't have to be makpid, and you certainly don't have to fast or give tzedakah if this becomes flipped over. Same thing when it comes to the tefillin shel yad. The part of the kshira, the part of the ritzuah that goes around the arm where you tighten the tefillin shel yad on, that ritzuah you have to make sure it does not become inverted. But where you make the windings around your arm or on your hand, if that becomes inverted, you don't have to worry. But again, mishum noi mitzvah, you should try to keep it the proper way.